legislation that would legalize recreational, marijuana, and also they last year legalized medical, marijuana, and some law enforcement officials, like the police chief, sorry that I'm singling you out, have highlighted some concerns, over the impact, this could have, on public safety. So I basically emailed Phil Weiser, who I know he was my first campaign manager, and now he's the Attorney General of Colorado. And since Colorado has more experience than New York has, I asked him for some recommendations as to experts who could help tell us about the experiences in Colorado. And we have two speakers today, and maybe you could just identify yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself. Mr. Reed first.
Sure, yeah, so my name is Jack Reed. I'm an analyst with the Colorado Department of Safety, Division of Criminal Justice, and my entire job is effectively bringing together data on the impacts of marijuana legalization. So I put out a couple of reports, and I do a lot of different presentations around the country. So I do have some New York connections. I actually I went to SUNY Albany for grad school. So not down by you, but I do have some New York connections. One of the things that I think we like to do in Colorado is to, help other people around the country, and frankly, kind of around the world sometimes, when they've got questions about legalization, because I think that we do, what you said is very true. We have a lot of experience with this, and I think that, we know some of the limitations of our data and can give recommendations about, the data that other states may or may not have, and then how you can maybe improve your data systems, or honestly, sometimes even give us some pointers about things that we have as well. So glad to be here and hope I can help you.
And we also have, Michael Song on the phone, and Michael is the Chief Deputy District Attorney for the City and County of Denver. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, hello, can you guys hear me?
Let me just say, could we hear?
Try it again.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, now it's better.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. My name is Michael Song. I'm currently now as Deputy DA in Denver, but before that, I was the first Attorney General in charge of marijuana for the Attorney General's office. I think everyone in my office couldn't believe that there was a pot guy that was in charge of all of the marijuana in Colorado. Did that for about 2.5 years, really kind of where I gained my expertise because they created my position right when recreational marijuana had passed. Prior to that, I was a federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C., and also in Hawaii. And then I graduated from West Point, served active duty in the military for about 6.5 years, and also got my law and business degree. So happy to be joining you guys.
Thank you. The first question is, if marijuana is legalized, what, are there safety issues in your opinion, for residents in terms of people, in terms of vehicle accidents or other types of crimes?
I think the question is increased safety issues.
Public safety impacts.
Public safety impacts.
Do you want me to take that or Mike?
Both. You could start if you want.
Yeah. You know what? I'll go ahead and start. That's a very simple question. The answer is yes. Right? I mean, if you're looking at it just from a public safety lens, and you talk to law enforcement, and it's just common sense. I mean, it's just one more thing that they have to worry about, right? I mean, DUI, marijuana, if it's legalized, marijuana is legalized, it's just one additional thing to worry about. In that aspect, of course, it would be better off not to have it legalized recreationally. However, it's not that simple, right? You have to weigh the benefits, the pros, the cons, the restorative justice aspects of it, the criminal justice system. I mean, all of these things have to come into factor, and public safety is a portion of that. So to simply answer your question, yes, it is a public safety issue, and if you ask 10 law enforcement officers, would they rather have it legalized or not legalized just from a public safety aspect, all 10 would say, of course.
Can I follow up with a question? This is Diana Judd-Durham. I'm a member of the town council. And what I'm wondering about really is how do we protect our children? That's a big concern. We have vape parlors and things like that, and parents are concerned about them using e-cigarettes. So is this going to create a problem for them? And what can we do as local officials to make it to protect them?
Yeah, I will. I'll let Jack tell you about the data. But what we're really seeing, a couple things. Number one, parenting has gotten a lot better. Number one. Number two, education is key. And number three, I'm 47 years old, and when I went to middle school and high school, we didn't have iPhones. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have social media. If you look at the kids nowadays, they spend an enormous amount of time in those avenues, right? So back in the day, everyone was like, hey, what are you going to do? I don't know. What are you going to do? I don't know. Let's smoke weed, right? And so there was more of that than there is now. Jack can tell you about the data in Colorado, and that, smoking marijuana, for teenage kids really hasn't gone up that much. The only increase that we've seen in smoking are 21 and above, and that's because it makes sense, because we legalize recreational marijuana, so you can smoke as a 21-year-old. So that's just my aspect of it. I do a lot of training, school resource officers, teachers, and I will tell you that, a lot of people, there are a lot of smart kids out there, and they are not really they're not really using that much. Where it comes into play more are the juveniles that are in the criminal justice system. And just say they're in the system and they're on probation and they have a hot UA, a urinalysis test for marijuana. And then they get revoked and then they go to prison. So I do think that is out there. But you're absolutely right. That's a good question. I like to say there are two A's for juveniles that we really have to be concerned about. Number one is the A is accessibility. Obviously, it's more accessible. But the other thing is the attitude. The attitude of a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old, when you ask them about marijuana, in Colorado, they're going to be like, no big deal. It's legal. There are stores everywhere. It's not a big deal. And that's what shocked me a little bit in terms of attitude. Jack?
Okay, so what Michael said is accurate. We've definitely been, I think, fortunate in Colorado that the rate of youth use has not increased since legalization. There are two surveys, one that's Colorado specific and asks between 25 and 45,000 high school students about marijuana use, and then there's a national survey that asks between 500 and 600. And both of those surveys have shown no increase in use since legalization, which is definitely very positive. The other thing Michael mentioned was the question about, the perceived risk of use. And perceived risk of use has gone down in Colorado among teens. It's also gone down nationwide at about the same rate. the perceived risk in Colorado is definitely lower than that at the national average, but, they're both decreasing. So that socialization question that he mentioned, I think that you can, he is correct that kids do see a lot more, they see more retail outlets, but it is kind of interesting that we haven't seen that increase. Regarding kids in the criminal justice system, we haven't seen an increase in arrest rates for marijuana. It's been kind of cut in half, and we haven't seen an increase in kids entering treatment for marijuana abuse. The kids who are going into treatment, about 70% of them have marijuana as their primary drug, and that's been relatively consistent pre and post legalization. It's gone up a little bit, so when we're looking at kids in treatment, marijuana, is definitely the primary drug of use and abuse, but it's kind of always been that way. When we look at something like discipline in schools, this is one of those data questions that we didn't have really great data. When we look at discipline in schools, so suspensions and expulsions, we only had a category of drugs, and it didn't break out marijuana separately until about 2016, 2017, that school year. And what we do see is that when we look at expulsions and law enforcement contacts in schools, marijuana makes up between 20 and 25% of the kids who do get either expelled or contacted by law enforcement. Marijuana is the reason. When you look at something like suspensions, it goes down to about 4 or 5%, but that's because there's a lot more suspensions that happen in schools.
If I could interject, this is Councilman.
One more thing too,
sure.
is that, I think the beginning of the question from the councilwoman was really, what can we do to protect our kids? And I do think that one thing we've done in Colorado is really focused on spending money on primary prevention. So not just, responding afterward with treatment, but really trying to talk to kids and talk to them in a way that they will respond to, because, fear doesn't work, especially with something that is now legal. And so, especially our Department of Public Health has worked very hard to try to get messages out there about, not necessarily the dangers of marijuana smoking, as they've been presented in the past, but really, these are the potential negative consequences. There's one of the campaigns is called Protect What's Next, and so they really focus on trying to let kids know, what, marijuana isn't going to help you with your sports and your basketball, or the things that you really care about. And frankly, from a legal point of view, you're underage, and it's still illegal. And so, being caught with marijuana can still have negative consequences for your possibility to get into college. And so these are things that I do think that we have focused on, and we're also focusing on trying to get that information to kids where they're at. So, putting TV out, frankly, isn't really a very good way to contact kids anymore. So, we're working on social media, we're working with YouTube pre-roll ads to try to get the information to kids in where they're at. And actually our department, our Office of Behavioral Health, is working on getting marijuana information out, and they're using Instagram influencers now. And so that's something I think that we are trying to be, we're trying to really get the information out to as many people as possible, as many youth as possible, and to make sure we're getting it to them where they're actually consuming those kinds of activities.
All right, so this is Councilman Sheehan. Earlier you had mentioned that there hasn't been an increase in arrests based on the data, but my question is, has there been a decrease in the number of arrests proportionally for people of color? And we have been given a book a booklet, and it was also sent to us by email, which I read, Lessons Learned from Marijuana Legalization in 4 U.S. states and D.C. And since it's still going to be illegal for those underage to have it, and they can still be arrested for having it, has there been any evidence that there's an increase in that age group or actually a decrease? What I'm really looking for is a decrease, because the way this is being sold is that marijuana disproportionately affects people of color, and I have no doubt that that's true. And the great majority of arrests are related to that, at least according to reported studies. What is the effect, once it's been legalized, on the underage group in the number of arrests that have been found in Colorado or elsewhere where it's been legalized?
And basically what you're also asking is, I guess, how legalization served to eliminate, reduce the criminalization for people of color.
That's the question. And in particular, carving out underage as well.
Okay, so I'll take this first, and then Michael can also give you his input. So when we look at the arrest rates, we have seen the arrest rates they went down some at first, then they came back up a little bit, now they've gone back down overall for youth. And we've seen that across the board for white youth and youth of color. The one thing we are still seeing, though, is that youth of color are arrested at a disproportionate rate. So, the arrest rate is just about double still for kids in that 10 to 17 range. It's gone down about the same. I'm looking at the data. I'm actually looking at my data on another screen, which is why I'm looking off a little bit. So,
Could you tell us what you're referencing, what you're looking at, the data? What is the source of the data that you are using when you look over and reference data? What is the source of the data?
So I put out a report in October of last year called Impacts of Marijuana Legalization in Colorado. And it is, I think that's one of the reasons why Michael kind of said, you might want to bring me online, so it's not that report. It's a much longer report that has a crazy amount of numbers. And I also have a dashboard that's online that can give you information through 2017 and then it'll be through 2018 as soon as that data comes out. So we've seen a decrease in the number of arrests, we've seen a decrease in the arrest rate. It hasn't been a large decrease. The decrease has happened across all racial groups, but there's still a disproportionate arrest rate for African Americans specifically.
Has there been any analysis about the other factors that might affect the disproportionate arrest rate of African American youth exclusive of the use or legalization of marijuana? In other words, I believe African American youth are subject to increased arrests anyway. So do we know how much of an increase is attributable specifically to the legalization of marijuana? This is Councilman Jones talking.
That's a good question. My department actually also puts out a report that's specifically about minority overrepresentation in the justice system. And you're exactly right. Across Colorado, we see disproportionate contact at arrest. We see disproportionate, when you look at incarcerated sentences, so kids being sentenced to, probation versus being sentenced to incarceration. We see disproportionate we see disproportionality across the board. So, the fact that there's disproportionate arrests and law enforcement contacts with marijuana, frankly, it does, it's that way across the board. So it's not something that is unique to marijuana, but it's one of those things where I think particularly when you look at where kids are being contacted, that you can potentially see some. You still see the same disproportionality. The reason behind it, honestly, That's more of that's a sociological question that I frankly kind of generally shy away from. Our office is really about presenting data and not necessarily getting into a lot of the explanatory stuff in the background. So I'm sorry to kind of defer on that. So and now I'll pick it off to Michael. If there are follow-up questions for me, that's fine, but then if Michael wants to respond to it, that'd be great.
In terms of the disproportionate rate of, arrests among the adult community, not only kids, could you talk about that?
Sure. Hold on one second. Sorry. So we do see a similar disproportionality in, let's see. So there's a couple of disproportionalities that we see when we look at the adult arrest rate. Again, we see especially African Americans being arrested at about twice the rate as whites. In Colorado, the arrest rate for Hispanics and whites is effectively the same, so there's not the disproportionality in the adult arrest rates. For Hispanics, that disproportionality really only kind of holds for African Americans. You also have to realize that the African American population in Colorado is relatively small. So compared to a lot of other states, it's one of those things where there's that disproportionality, but when you look at the absolute numbers, they're still relatively low because the number of African Americans in Colorado, it's not a really big population. Remember, the Hispanic population is significantly the white population. So again, we do see double the rate of African Americans compared to whites or Hispanics when it comes to marijuana arrests.
How does legalization alleviate that?
Yeah, has legalization alleviated any of this? Right.
So the rates have decreased across the board for all racial groups, especially for adults. When you look at something like the most common arrest type prior to legalization was possession, was simple possession. It accounted for about 85% of the arrests that occurred. So that's gone down, and what we continue to see is the number of more serious arrests and more serious court filings. It went down at first, so we're talking about marijuana distribution, marijuana manufacturing, intent to, possession and intent to sell. And we saw that go down at first, but then we've seen that increase. I think once law enforcement got a clearer sense of what was still illegal now, that we, that went back, that's gone back up. There really hasn't been, I think, a disproportionality in that though. Honestly, when you look at the arrests that are happening for higher level offenses, that is not happening really in any kind of, in a racially disparate fashion. I think that's actually kind of been, if there is any, I think that's actually probably been proportional to the population.
If I could ask a question, this is a police chief, Chris McNerney. I've read reports
Chris,
that,
could you turn the microphone towards you?
I've read reports that 75% of local municipalities have passed ordinances prohibiting dispensaries in their communities. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think it might be a little bit lower now. I think it's maybe 65%. Yeah, and honestly, I think that's one thing that when we looked at legalizing, giving people local control over whether or not they wanted their communities to allow marijuana. I think I think that it seems to allay a lot of the concerns for municipalities and counties who don't want shops in their counties. When you look at the percentage of the population that has legal marijuana within their jurisdiction, it's closer to about, I think, 2/3. So while there's a lot of municipalities that have opted out, you're exactly right about that. Most of the major municipalities have opted in. The one exception for the really large one is Colorado Springs, which is south of here. And it's a relatively large city, at least for Colorado perspective. They don't have legal marijuana, like legal retail marijuana. They do have legal medical marijuana though. And so that's actually the only city in Colorado, or the only place in Colorado, where we haven't seen a decrease in those with medical marijuana cards, is in the one major area where retail marijuana is still out. So I think that if you talk to municipalities, if you talk to the Colorado Municipal League, that they would be able to give you a good perspective on how individual municipalities are making that decision.
Okay, so when you talk about the social impact, are you seeing that the low-income communities are generally communities that have legalized it and not passed those ordinance prohibiting it?
So this is where the demographics of Colorado become a little bit wonky, but maybe, and I mean, New York actually has a lot of the same distribution where you end up with, there's a ton of municipalities upstate, and there's a lot of them that do suffer poverty. When we look at the concentrated poverty in Colorado is, I think, in the cities, especially in Denver, and there's other cities near Denver that I think have more concentrated poverty. In those areas, when you look at the map of where dispensaries and grows are located, I think you do kind of see that there is a concentration of these places in potentially lower income communities, because those lower income communities oftentimes abut the commercial areas, which are where these places are actually allowed generally. So they have to be, at least 1,000 feet from schools and daycares and all that. But you are still, you do see you do see disproportionate impacts, especially in our cities. And this would actually be something I think to speak to Denver with specifically. When you get out into more rural areas, there are some smaller cities in Colorado, and I don't necessarily think when you look at disproportionality by income, by income level, that we're seeing that as much, because we do have a number of smaller areas in rural Colorado that have opted in to selling legal marijuana, in part because of the possible benefits to the tax base. Again, that would be, I think, something to follow up with the Colorado Municipal League, because I think they really are on the ground a little bit more with a lot of the cities around the state.
I had a question. Some residents had emailed me. They wanted me to ask about the impact of legalized marijuana on, motor vehicle accidents, pedestrian accidents, high school graduation rates, motor vehicle summonses, domestic violence, addiction rates to illicit drugs, unemployment, and
You might want to take those one at a time.
no, I just want to, yeah.
That is a very long list. So I can take a hit of a few of the things. When we look at something like motor vehicle fatalities, the number of motor vehicle fatalities in Colorado, where a driver tested positive for some cannabinoid in their system, so it might be active delta-9 THC, it might be an inactive metabolite that stays in your system for longer, that has gone up. From the fatalities point of view, in 2012 or 2013, I'm sorry, there were 55 fatalities where a driver tested positive for some cannabinoid in that account. That was about 11% of the fatalities. When you look at 2017, it went up to about 139. So when it accounted for a little over 20% of our fatalities. And even when you look at the question of whether they're testing positive for Delta-9, which is the active component of THC, that we don't have great trend data on that, and, that's again, a data question, that we would I'd need to talk further, but that's actually more of a state data question. And that accounts for about, I think 14 or 15% of our fatalities. Driver has some Delta-9 on board. So determining impairment, though, in a case like that is very, very difficult. As the chief knows, when you've got alcohol and it's 0.08, you're pretty much set, right? From an impairment point of view, you can infer impairment legally very easily. But with marijuana, it becomes much more complicated. And I think that this is something that, law enforcement across the country, will say is that marijuana, and frankly, all other drugs besides alcohol, are much more complicated to assess impairment for. The training that's required is much, it's more significant. It's, a couple weeks, and it can be difficult and costly for law enforcement to get a lot of their officers trained as drug recognition experts. I don't know if the chief has had experience getting DREs on board, but you can definitely speak to the fiscal impact that can have. That's something, though, that I think we have used our marijuana money for. We've actually taken marijuana tax money and used that for training of law enforcement as drug recognition experts, as well as training them in advanced roadside impairment detection. So that's one of those things where I think that, again, as Michael pointed out, it's not a simple answer looking at public safety. So that's one of those things where our ability to make really good statements about impaired driving marijuana is limited due to the limitations in our data. And I know that, frankly, from a DUI perspective, you all are going to have the same limitations. I actually talked to your lab, the main lab at the State Patrol. They were in town a couple months ago, and they don't actually test blood and give you a quantitative value for THC. They just look at, is there THC on board at all, anything, or not? And so I think when New York is looking at something like impairment, it's going to be very difficult for you as well to look at what are the trends of people testing positive for this and impairment, just because of the nature of the testing is current. So going back to that extremely long list, high school graduation rates have increased, high school dropout rates have decreased. Those are two things that I know people were very concerned about when marijuana got legalized. Those are not negative impacts that we are currently seeing.
What about domestic violence?
You know what, domestic violence, so I guess one of the other issues that we found, and that you will find as well if you legalize, is that there's no easy way to tie most other criminal activity to marijuana. There's not a checkbox in our police's record management system that says domestic violence, marijuana related, unless they actually make an arrest that has a marijuana charge in addition to it. It's very, very difficult to suss that out, I guess. I haven't looked at the domestic violence arrest rate over time. When we look at something like our violent crime offense rate, that has increased, but that's also increased across the country. So it's not just that Colorado is seeing an increase and the country is seeing a downward trend in violent crime.
But
increased as well.
Colorado, it appears, has increased 11 times faster than the rest of the nation in crime increase since legalization.
So we're still actually below the national average when it comes to a violent crime rate. I guess the issue with looking at that, so I know the data you're referencing, and that data actually uses some unofficial statistics. So it doesn't just look at the official FBI number, it also references data that was not official, that they were getting from individual agencies. And so I think that that particular report, to a certain extent, kind of mixes data sources that shouldn't necessarily be mixed. And that is something that I do have the data that looks at the arrest rates and nationally, or the offense rates nationally and in Colorado. So I would be able to get that to you. I can't do that right now, but I would be able to use an apples to apples because I'm pretty sure I know the report you're discussing, and that it's not the data that they're referencing is an apples to apples.
Somebody asked me, how does the state fatalities data compare to the Netherlands? Would you have any of that information? No?
No. The fatalities.
Yeah. Wait, hold on for a second.
So the question comes from an article that I read,
Could you identify yourself?
Maury Markowitz in Hastings, that was published, I think, in the New York Times last year, which showed that Holland, which has decriminalized both recreational and medicinal uses of marijuana since the late 20th century, so for about 20 years, they have mortality rates from automobile accidents from 2015, the last published data, and they had about 600 deaths in the whole country. And of those, 2 to 3% had marijuana derivatives, cannabinoid derivatives in specimens from the fatalities. So that accounted for about 12 deaths, roughly. In contrast, alcohol accounted for about 120 deaths. So if you're, if we're going to do apples to apples in terms of risk, I would agree that we don't want to increase the mortality rate from anything. But if we were trying to really control mortality, the focus should still be to compare the increment in mortality attributable to marijuana use to alcohol use and see if those numbers are changing as well.
Yeah, so the question about decriminalization in the Netherlands, obviously decriminalization, you still can't, there aren't any shops where you can go legally buy marijuana in the Netherlands. You can go to a coffee shop, consume it in that coffee shop. There still isn't a legal marketplace in the Netherlands for legal cannabis. And so, I think that, frankly, Colorado was the first legal cannabis marketplace in the world. And so and before I could, comment on the driving, that rate in the Netherlands, I would need to know a lot more about their transportation system. So what, when you look at something like, how many people are driving, what are the vehicle miles traveled, what is the rate of fatalities per vehicle miles traveled, doing those kinds of cross-national comparisons becomes, from a data point of view, very complicated.
So somebody asked me how the dispensaries are regulated and how they're taxed, and is it based on earnings?
So the dispensaries are taxed based on, yes, they're taxed based on sales. So it's there's a couple different sales taxes. There's one for medical, that's about 3%. There's one for retail marijuana, is the state tax is about 15%, or is 15%, and municipalities can actually put on their own tax in addition to that. And there's also a 15% excise tax on the sale, the wholesale of marijuana. Because it is based on because it's a sales tax and it's based on then the amount that's sold rather than something like the weight, which is another way to tax this. And I think it's probably similar to how alcohol is taxed in some places by the liter rather than actually sales tax. So that's collected. And, I think last year we collected about $264 million in sales tax at the state level. So, and that pays for the regulation of marijuana, and then it also allows for, the kind of prevention campaigns that I mentioned before, as well as, improved data collection, for people like me, as well as improved data collection for DUIs. It allows our Department of Public Health to do more campaigns. It allows us to put more people in schools to do health work. So I think that, when you look at taxes, the other thing though is that, we also have like a $15 billion in taxes we collect. It's, less than 1% of our taxes are from marijuana. And I think that the one thing that I know our past director of marijuana coordination tried to make a point of was that, marijuana is not something that when you look at your overall total budget, it's going to fill large gaps. From like a school building perspective, we've taken, about $40 million to help with building these schools. There's billions of dollars of need. And so, it's not going to necessarily fill a lot of the huge gaps. When you look at the data and you look at what the needs are, the large budget needs are in a state versus the amount of marijuana taxes that you bring in. We do actually bring in more marijuana taxes than alcohol.
Yeah, I'm sort of wondering, the town, we don't have the power by law to legalize or not legalize marijuana. That's going to be a decision of the state legislature. Could you discuss the pluses and minuses of a local government opting in or out? Because if the state legislature decriminalizes marijuana and they legalize it, that's going to be the state law. So then local governments could say, the only issue that we have is, are we going to allow the sale of marijuana in our local stores?
Before you answer that, this is Diana Chutner again.
Sure.
I was wondering, has it reduced the amount of marijuana that's not been legalized, that's being sold? I mean,
The black market.
Taxable?
Right. What has happened with the black market is what Diana Chutner is asking. And based on the report, and are you familiar with this? Lessons learned from marijuana legalization in the 4 U.S. states and D.C. Is that the report you were saying, that it makes inappropriate nexus in data or not?
I'm not sure if that's is that the one that says, I have seen that, yes, I have seen that report. Actually, I'm going to let Michael take a first shot at this question, because this question, I think, is a lot more, it's not necessarily data related as it is more about policy. And I normally try to stay away from policy questions, so I'll hand this off to Michael to look at first.
Yeah. Hey, Jack. Thanks, and great job on the data. So I think, to go back, it's still too early to tell if there's any correlation between legalized marijuana and the increase or decrease of crime. I know it's been since 2012, but still, I think it's just too early, and part of it is just because there's so many varying factors. When you talk about crime, sure, all the small possession charges have gone away, and that was a huge chunk of our arrests and cases. However, there's an increase in public consumption, right, just because people just don't know the rules. People don't understand that marijuana dispensaries get robbed almost twice or 3 times more than the liquor stores, right? Because people think there's cash or marijuana, and green is green. And so that's all kind of changing, because now marijuana stores are being fortified with security, steel walls. I mean, they're almost like banks. So that said, the black market, sure, has gone away, but what has taken its place is the gray market. The black market is simple: grown illegally, sold illegally. The gray market is grown legally, but sold illegally. So that's what we're seeing. And I think the biggest burden is going to be on the chief of police there, because, number one, not only does the chief need to train all of his new officers on the new laws, right? The rules for search and seizures change. The rules for canines change. The rule for civil liability changes, right? For example, chief of police gets some huge bust where he gets 2,000 marijuana plants and 200 pounds of dried marijuana. Where is the chief of police going to put all of that marijuana and store it as evidence, right? There's no place to store that as evidence. Is he going to have to keep it alive before it goes to trial, right? If it dies, can the defendant sue because they ultimately could win their case? So there are so many collateral consequences that we didn't think of, and then they happened, right? And now we know, and we're trying to give that knowledge to you guys.
Would you, if you were us, I'm sorry.
Let him finish. Go ahead.
If I didn't know, I don't know if you know this, but in Colorado, if I arrest a guy for marijuana and he has something, or DUI, and he has some marijuana in his pocket, we take him to the jail, I can't give him that marijuana back. Because as an officer, I would be distributing marijuana in violation of Federal Controlled Substance Act, right? So your jail, your property book officer has to create new policy in terms of if marijuana is found on any arrestee, that marijuana has to ultimately be destroyed because in Colorado, case law says you can't give that marijuana back, right? Now, that blows your mind a little bit, right? Wait a second, this is legal, this is personal property, how come we can't give it back? Well, our Supreme Court has said that it is distribution of marijuana, so law enforcement officers can't give that back. So there are so many collateral consequences from legalizing marijuana that you need to get ready for. Off the record, Manhattan DA's office, the mayor's office of New York have already came and visited with us, talking about how to do this. What are the pluses? What are the minuses, right? I mean, it's going to happen, right? And me and Jack aren't here to tell you that it's good or bad or it's right or wrong. We're here to tell you that it's coming, right? So for a town of your size, what I would recommend is incrementalism, right? Now you can say, we don't want any stores in our town. However, that doesn't defeat the fact that you're going to be able, as a 21-year-old, to grow marijuana and to smoke marijuana. So how does that impact your real estate, right? So in other words, if you have a house that's growing marijuana and your neighbor is doing that and you want to sell your house, how do you do that? Well, you limit it by city ordinances, right? You limit it, you zone different areas in terms of, you can always be more strict than state law. So if the state law says, hey, every 21-year-old can possess 1 ounce of marijuana and grow 6 plants, that's fine, right? But city ordinance can say 6 plant limit per household, right? Because if you don't do that, then 2 21-year-olds can grow 12 plants. 3 21-year-olds can grow 18 plants. And Colorado had to learn the hard way, right? We had to be like, oh no, we need to fix this, so we're going to pass a zoning kind of ordinance and do it, later on. So there are so many. You guys are looking at it from big picture, and that's great. But there's some nuances that I think could be effective tools so that you just don't open up Pandora's box like we did, right? And the other thing is, if you do give out licenses in your town, make sure you give out 1 or 2. You don't have to give out 375 like the city and county of Denver did, right? Make sure you give out 1 or 2, and you can put conditions on it. In Hawaii, they say you have to have $1.5 million cash on hand to apply for a license. Why? Because they know that you have the money and you won't go black market, right? So there are so many things that you can do to protect those individuals in your city from quality of life, from public safety, to all those things. But I will tell you that it starts with police. It starts with public safety. to ensure, because I guarantee you, the first thing that we got in Colorado once it passed, man, our cops were depressed. They were just like, I can't believe marijuana is now legal. And then they really started just ignoring it. They're like, listen, I'm not going to get in trouble for, say, taking someone's marijuana and have civil liability. And then we started developing case law. And so that's kind of how it worked. So, you know, the gray market is there. We have a lot of cases where there are basically just a bunch of guys that say, hey, let's buy marijuana here and then let's ship it, right, or fly it or drive it to a neighbor state, collect the money, and do it that way because, you know, different states don't have recreational marijuana and we can make double or triple the money.
Well, that's some of the data that's in this pamphlet that we have. It's a fairly extensive pamphlet, which basically states that in Colorado, they're growing an awful lot more in volume marijuana that they would ever use in the state itself in order to then transport it to states where it doesn't, it's not legal. I assume that there are no regulations, there's nobody monitoring how much is being grown in Colorado to avoid that problem happening, and I assume New York
Yeah,
is not
you know,
going to do that.
I can tell you anecdotally, I've talked to USPIS, United States Postal, you know, investigation services, and they tell us that probably people will just buy some marijuana, like at stores, you know, candy bars, edibles. They'll wrap it up in bubble wrap. They'll put fabric softener in there, and then they'll, you know, ship it off via, you know, just ship it off via mail, and then get paid via Western Union. And it's going undetected because there's just so much. You know, the social norms of marijuana becoming mainstream, it's real. I mean, I will tell you that the Manhattan DA's office no longer prosecutes small amounts of marijuana crime. Their DA has made that call. I mean, the two things that I'm working on right now, I'm working on a program called Turn Over a New Leaf. So if you had a marijuana conviction in the past that would now be legal, right, we are vacating that conviction and expunging it right from the record. I mean, there is just a shift in terms of, you know, just the social acceptance of marijuana, cannabis in Colorado. And I think that is going to continue. Jared Polis is now our governor. He was a strong proponent of marijuana and cannabis at the federal level, and I think he ran on that, and it went well for him. So for your town, I will tell you that it is coming. Recreational marijuana is coming to the state of New York. So yeah, I would first say to your town, the sky will not fall. You will wake up every day. There is nothing in your body that will tell you to leave that beautiful town. However, it is not perfect. It's far from perfect. So you're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to overcome. But ultimately, I think there are rules and ordinances that can be crafted in your city to make it a safer place.
Just two things. One is we have several people on the phone. Somebody's making an awful lot of noise. If you could put your phone on mute, unless you're asking a question, that would be really terrific. Secondly, getting back to the supervisor's question about what happens in an individual town, is there the equivalent of a town similar to Greenburgh in Colorado where you say you had to learn from your mistakes? We would rather not repeat those mistakes and take years to remedy them. Is there a town that has several revisions of their law that you think have kept up with addressing mistakes that we could then take a look at to see how appropriate it would be for us?
Yeah, you know, there is, I mean, see, I don't think the city and county of Denver are, it would be equivalent to your town. However, I do know that because they let 375 people have licenses, that they are now kind of dialing that back and have created these ordinances and zoning laws and all these other things that have really kind of made it difficult for even a marijuana store to run a business in Denver. You know, I'm not from Colorado, so Jack would probably have a better idea of a similar town that would be comparable to yours. Jack?
So, Michael, I'm not from Colorado either, so I'm from Nevada.
Don't forget the dude.
Anyway, so I do think that, again, since there is local control in Colorado, different cities have chosen to, legalize in different ways. There's a city just to the east of Denver, Aurora, and, they had no legal, they actually had no legal, they had no medical, and when retail was legalized, they decided to, they had 6 council districts. And they said, we don't want concentrations of shops in one area, kind of like we've seen in Denver in some areas. And so they gave 4 licenses in each council district, and then they had effectively like an RFP process where people put in applications and they were scored, and then, the top scoring applications were given licenses. And you have to be licensed at both the local level and the state level, and it was one of those things where they rolled things out very slowly. And I think Michael's right on that when you look at how a lot of the towns and cities and counties in Colorado have rolled things out, the fact that Denver has so many is to a certain extent kind of a historical artifact, just because of how things started there prior to any regulation, and then it became, again, difficult to kind of dial it back. And so I think that there are a number of cities that, Greenburgh could look at and say, and talk to them about how they did this kind of incrementalism, because I do think that is, keeping control of your marketplace, because you keep control of your marketplace for everything else, right? People can't put liquor stores everywhere. You have the ability, so at least in Colorado, we have the ability to make those decisions. And, it's possible that New York wouldn't allow local control of the municipalities. I'm not sure, but I think that it would be, Albany's going to do what they're going to do, right? But I think that hopefully that you would be able to maintain a good amount of local control. And I do think that there are towns and cities where that could inform you. Absolutely.
How has the legalization of marijuana impacted the use of, tobacco? Have you seen a decrease in the use of, tobacco? And somebody also wanted to know if Colorado localities are tracking increases in use of combustible products, including that of tobacco, and if there's a mix of marijuana with tobacco.
Combustible?
That's what they said.
So combustible tobacco use has gone down and has continued to decrease amongst youth and amongst adults. I think the biggest issue from a nicotine point of view that we've seen, especially with use, is the advent of vaping. And so
You having communication problems?
Is it full?
No,
Now you're back.
You're starting to come back.
So, we implemented a lot of the, same Clean Indoor Air Act regulations around tobacco use that, have been implemented in the country. And so, I think that we've seen that decrease in the combustible tobacco use, the change in, the change in the scope of vaping is a different issue. And that's something that I think that our people in public health are looking at. they do see it as a separate but related public health issue because it's still nicotine, even if you're not, even if it's not a combustible type. And so, yeah, we've seen a decrease in combustible tobacco use, but vaping has become an issue, more of an issue.
So, somebody asked me if there's guarantees on the product and its strength.
Right, that's a good point. Do they actually extract off the THC off of the leaves, get it to a certain concentration and put it back on again? Or is it just happens to be who the grower is? Or do they actually control, as in the tobacco industry, control the level of nicotine at their desire?
Okay, so.
You like that?
There are other people who would have much stronger opinions on this, I think. However, I'll give you kind of, so in Colorado, we have smokable flower, we have concentrates, we have edibles, and at present, there aren't any limits on the percent of THC that can be in a concentrate. And so there are concentrates that are, in our marketplace that are potentially upwards of 90% THC. In our, the marketplace for bud, flower, you can, a lot of it is between 15 to 25%. And then with edibles, that's actually something we've looked at, and we do have limits on the amount of THC in an edible, and it has to be easily stored. You have to be able to easily make a serving size that is 10 milligrams of THC. So I think that when you look at the authors of the report that you've got in front of you, Smart Colorado, or that's Sam, that's Sam, that's right. That, the issue of the THC concentration of concentrates in our marketplace is one that you would be mindful, you should be mindful of, I guess. And that's really a state issue more than a local issue, because at least here, once you've accepted the legal marijuana, it becomes a lot more difficult to then say we're only going to accept this kind. But I do think that it's important to be mindful of the types of products you allow out in the marketplace. And that's about as much as I can say on that, probably more than I can say. So, I don't know if Michael wants to grab this one.
Well, just from
Yeah,
experience, Michael, just for a moment. Michael?
Hey guys, I
I just,
couldn't hear all of Jack's comments.
he's the one that's getting the background noise. Michael, I think you're getting some background noise when you're not speaking. I just wanted to be you to be mindful of that. And I do also, as part of that question, since there could be such a broad range of THC levels, are there labeling requirements in the legislation so that somebody who typically has a package of 30% THC now gets one with 90% THC, they can be in a heap of trouble if they don't know any better, and how is that regulated?
Yeah, that's a question that's been posed many times. It's been brought up via legislation, and the pro-marijuana lobby has shut it down because it hurts their bottom dollar. So that's probably something that you guys should be aware of. And I just wanted to reiterate, like someone else said, this is something that the state is working on and will pass a law. And when they pass that law, they will create a new division, a marijuana enforcement division. And so a lot of the laws will be set. For your town, I think the only thing you can do is create ordinances that will make it safer for the members of your community. And so, some of those ordinances can be via zoning and other things. But in terms of stopping marijuana, once the state law passed recreationally, it's there. Then the question becomes, do we want dispensaries in our region or not? I will tell you from what I remember in Colorado, if you were a liberal city, tend to vote Democrat, they allowed it. If you were a conservative city, tend to vote Republican, they didn't allow it. But now, through time, that's shifted. Most everyone is now allowing it because they see it as a potential moneymaker. They see it as employment, all these things. So that's kind of how I have viewed, marijuana, recreational, and how it affects small towns and communities.
Right, I just,
So I'm sorry, actually, if I can follow up on the labeling question now, because that seemed to be, there are very strict labeling requirements that do tell you the percentage of THC in your product. And the way that the Colorado system of tracking of manufacturing happens, it's called seed to sale tracking. And so, like, if you have a marijuana product, on that product, it can tell you the exact plants that it came from. And we do have testing for both potency of THC as well as testing for pesticides and microbials and solvents. And so, building up that lab capability did take some time, in part because there was not a really great way to, prior to this, it was marijuana where it wasn't, right? I mean, if it was illegal, then, from a law enforcement perspective, it didn't matter if it had, pesticides in it. But when you become a legal marketplace, then you have to start worrying about those kinds of things, especially around, consumer protection. So we do have, very good labeling in place, and we have testing, and there's a whole lot of rules, and that would be a question for our people in public health and people at the marijuana enforcement division. They can give you a lot more details about that, but I will let you know that those labeling requirements are in place to let you know that, yep, this is a 15% product, or this is a 90% product. Frankly, to kind of follow up a little bit though, people that are marijuana naive are marijuana naive. And whether or not they understand exactly what they're getting into is an open question.
yeah, I just had one other question relating to our discussion before of the disproportionate arrests for low-level marijuana possession. Would you have any recommendations as to what we could do to close the gap so that there'd be, greater equity and equality in addressing the issues?
Or district attorneys stop prosecuting low-level marijuana.
That's I think, that's a larger social question that I don't think we can answer for you. We're having, we have our same issues, and frankly, they're difficult for us to answer as well. So, from a social equity point of view, that's something that I think you're going to have to look at. And I don't think we have a lot of great ideas for you other than, so I don't know if Michael has anything else on that. Again, that's more of a policy, social justice question that I generally don't get into because it's not data related. Right.
Well, we've taken up a lot of your time, so I really appreciate your spending over an hour, almost an hour and a half, so an hour and 15 minutes, and thank you so much. We learned a lot, and I'm going to share, this, video with other municipalities in Westchester County, with state lawmakers as well, and, for me, this has been very, very interesting, so I want to thank both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been very helpful, and what's also been very helpful is when you say, that's out of your area of expertise, you say it's out of your area of expertise, which is terrific, because it really helps us, because there's so much information that we have, and we're getting, it's a lot to go through, and you've made it.
It really is. I'll also make sure that I send you a link to my report, because again, while it's not as glossy as the report from Sam, it does have a lot of data.
That would be very helpful if both of you have any links that you could send me when I'm going to be making a YouTube, video of this, so then I could include the YouTube video with the links to, more information. So if you could get that to me, that would be very, very helpful, and I'm sure people in the community
I'm going to sign you off.
will really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us, and this was really, really a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, great. Okay, now we have the special meeting. Let's see. And then we have an interview, and then after that, we have to go to Maria Regina. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.